She is the ship of dreams. Both Titanic 1, now lying at the bottom of the North Atlantic, and Titanic 2, still schematics and people in costume in promo video. But after more than a decade since first profit, Titanic 2 is, allegedly, back in the slip after being suspended during COVID.
Another Titanic is being built, and there have been recent updates about its construction. We've all seen how tragic the 1912 incident was, a mistake that should never be repeated ever again. But people are planning to have a new and improved one up by 2027, which is closer than you might think.
Up to that time, we'd fully designed the ship and were in the process of letting out construction contracts. And the first ship will come into service, scheduled at the moment in June 2027.
What's new about this ship? And how are they so sure that the same mistake won't happen again? Join us as we talk about everything out there about Titanic 2. The story of the Titanic. The RMS Titanic was called the Ship of Dreams when it was advertised. It all began in the early 20th century when the White Star Line wanted to build the largest and most luxurious passenger steamship that the world had ever seen. Construction began in March 1909 at the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland. 3 years later, it was completed and set to sail. One look at it, and people were completely shocked to see that something this massive was capable of being built when technology wasn't as advanced as it is today. This man-made beauty was 882 feet 9 inches long, weighing over 46,000 tons. A lot of people didn't really know how ships worked back then. When they found out that it weighed the amount it did, everyone asked how it would float in the first place. But the engineers and people behind the Titanic said that it was virtually unsinkable. It had many features with first-class accommodations that were considered to be five-star hotels of that time. The ticking time bomb had a grand staircase, swimming pool, gymnasium, Turkish bath, and dining rooms you could only find in elite mansions. The ship was divided into 3 classes, namely the first, second, and third. Naming them was the easy part, but when guests walked in, they realized why they were called that. The accommodations were visibly very different, with the first being reserved for the elite class. Small details like these were probably noticed in the James Cameron film from 1997. Believe it or not, most of the plot is based on true events. The interior was almost spot on, and all the families signing up for a fun vacation didn't know they were signing up for a death wish. On the night of April 14th, 1912, the Titanic was traveling at near top speed through the North Atlantic. It was just merely hours away from ending in a complete disaster. While everyone inside was enjoying their time, Captain Edward Smith was ignoring all warnings of deadly icebergs in the area.
It will make the bergs harder to see.
But the story has a lot of depth to it. Some sources say that Captain Edward never ignored the warnings. Instead, it was just the ship signaling the crew that they passed through some icebergs nearby. Other than that, the weather that night was calm and cool. Captains don't usually slow down or stop their boats under such circumstances. They only slow down if the weather is hazy or they can't see what's ahead. Captain Edward, who was once a Navy officer, was known to put his boats through a lot of pressure. At the time, he was going around 21 to 22 knots, which is around 25 miles per hour, and there were no signs of stopping. But this doesn't mean that he's not partly to blame for the loss of over 1,500 lives, including women and children. At the most crucial moment of the journey, Captain Edward was attending a dinner party with the rich folk in the first-class hall. A businessman who was aboard the RMS Titanic, named George Widener, was holding a dinner party in the captain's honor. Edward was actually retiring after the Titanic reached New York City, so the party was dedicated to all the years of hard work. Smith left the party pretty early to talk to Charles Littler, who was part of the crew. Smith then went to his cabin at around 9:20 p.m. Once again, He was nowhere to be seen at the bridge during a very important time during the voyage. But this wasn't the first time Captain Edward wasn't seen anywhere near the bridge during an urgent and important moment. He was also overseeing the HMS Hawke while it left the Southampton harbor. Luckily, this ship didn't have the same ending as the Titanic. However, the Hawke took a lot more damage on her maiden voyage. Many sources say that Smith knew what he was doing. All captains should take risks once in a while, and the fact that he didn't slow down the Titanic was one of the many ways he was a good captain. There was just too much going on at the time. Smith not being available on the bridge, the massive icebergs that appeared to be small, but were actually very big, and of course the fragility of a ship this big. The wreckage that took all those lives shook the earth to the core. They realized that things had to be taken more seriously, especially the safety of anyone in the sea, and so, the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea was established in 1914. From 2,240 passengers, 706 survived the sinking and lived to tell different stories of their experiences. Whether it was heroism, sacrifice, or regret, the friends and families of these survivors still feel the effects of the incident over a century later. The story that everyone is familiar with is Jack and Rose's, but you may be shocked to realize that the entire romantic plot between the two is completely fictional on James Cameron's part. He did, however, gather stories from different survivors to, in a way, completely present everyone's tragedy in one film. After 1912, people all over the world stopped remembering what happened to the Titanic. Newer tragedies came up, and it was slowly getting buried in people's minds, much like the actual ship thousands of feet deep underwater. But the wreck's discovery in 1985 by Robert Ballard brought the mystery back into full effect. It was as if the Titanic sunk that year the way everyone was fascinated by the wreckage. James Cameron topped it all off with the 1997 film that earned over $2 billion at the box office. For a film in the late 90s, this was a huge victory in the world of cinema, attempting to replicate the Titanic. So with all this in mind, why would someone try rebuilding another Titanic? It's one thing to build a ship just as big and call it something else. But Clive Palmer, chairman of the Blue Star Line, wants to make something with the same name and has been inspired by the overall architecture of the man-made achievement. This isn't the first time that someone has tried replicating the RMS Titanic, though. These came into being shortly after the discovery of the sunken ship in 1985. Everyone was fascinated once again and wanted to build something better, stronger, and able to survive its complete voyage. One of the first proposals came from a South African businessman named Cyril Goose. He wanted to make an exact copy of the original ship, with a few modifications that were slightly more technologically advanced as compared to that of 1912. In 1998, his suggestion was featured on the cover of Popular Mechanics magazine. Unfortunately, the idea never left the drawing board because of insufficient funds. Gauss was asking for $500 million, and investors weren't ready to pitch in for something as risky as that again. Another Swiss company planned to do something similar to Goose's idea, hoping to launch by 2002. But much like the South African plan, this too didn't get the attention of enough investors. All of this showed that no one was really prepared to go forward with building another Titanic after what happened last time. But when the sinking of the Titanic reached its centenary, which is basically another word for 100-year anniversary, people in 2012 decided that it could very much be time for another ship. Here's when Clive Palmer's idea came into play. How did the idea of Titanic 2 start? The Australian billionaire announced that he wants to replicate the original Titanic with modern safety and navigation systems. Of course, there'll be some exceptionally strong steel and high durability on this thing too, so it doesn't hit any incoming icebergs and repeat another disaster. At first, everyone thought that he was kidding, but Clive soon signed a memorandum of understanding with a Chinese shipyard and formed the Blue Star Line. The Titanic's original operating company was White Star Line. Clive was on a mission, and he doesn't look like he's backing down until it's accomplished. Palmer's Titanic II was supposed to launch in 2016. He even planned the route to go from Southampton to New York. The chairman was pretty excited about the whole thing and planned a world tour, vacation cruises, and voyages to the Caribbeans too. But as the years went by, the shipyard that Clive signed with never got back to him. Apparently, there were a lot of arguments regarding the payments, fund withdrawals, and other legal and political problems that Palmer ran into. By 2018, Titanic II was thought to be a dream that would never come true. Palmer tried his best with marketing strategies, all while dealing with his politics. Money, though, doesn't seem to be a problem. As a former member of the Australian House of Representatives, Palmer comes from money. He owns many coal and iron mines along with other Australian businesses, making him the 17th richest man in the continent, with a net worth of $4.4 billion. The craziest thing is that China started planning a project much like Clive's around the same time. A full-scale landlocked replica of the Titanic was planned as part of a theme park in the Sichuan province, so that was the biggest difference. While Palmer wanted a fully functional replica used for transport and cruises, China wanted it to be a tourist attraction that stayed in place for visitors around the world. But it looks like even a superpower country like China can't manage to build a replica. They proposed an iceberg collision simulation that disturbed many investors around the world. They pulled away from the funds, and the whole idea was slowly turning out to be non-profitable.
从码头开始，对吧？我们会复制当年的南安普顿码头，对吧？以及所有的蒸汽机、驾驶舱，对吧？包括游泳池、健身房，都会按当年的标准进行复建，对吧？所有一个是供游客参观，参观过程中我们会讲述泰坦尼克海难发生时一些感人的故事。
It was supposed to be called the Romandicea Titanic and planned to launch in January 2014. It cost $161 million to build, but as of late, there has been no update about that particular project. Many think that it was scrapped and never moved forward. But let's go back to Clive Palmer's vision for a moment. Looking at the past, both South African and Swiss projects were scrapped completely. The people who envisioned a replica of the Titanic decided it was of no use and wouldn't be a good idea in the long run. Palmer, on the other hand, is determined, and it's like he won't rest until Titanic II is created. His plan has caught the attention of many media outlets and the public who might be the possible future guests on board. The initial phase of the project had a lot of optimism and flair. Palmer's team talked to some of the world's best architects and consultants so that they knew whether or not their mission was doable. Of course, there needed to be heavy discussions on safety and if the original Titanic had any faults during construction. He ended up signing with CSC Jinling Shipyard in China to build the ship before the country decided to make its own landlocked replica. China's model cost $161 million to make, but since Palmer wanted his to actually travel and accommodate hundreds and thousands of people, he was hoping for over $500 million in construction and operation. Even though Palmer was worth billions of dollars, he wasn't going to spend every penny on this passion project. He knew the risks too, and it wasn't really something he would bet all his money on. But he was still hopeful. Palmer wasn't going to let his plan die because he was sure that Titanic II would be a global success. Since he was proposing the replica in 2012, he had to deal with yet another tragedy that had investors, marketers, and maritime experts pulling out of the project. What happened in Italy? On January 13, 2012, an Italian cruise ship called Costa Concordia struck a rock off the coast of Isola del Giglio in Tuscany, Italy. Like the Titanic, the Costa Concordia was a luxury cruise ship with room for thousands of passengers. It was 952 feet long, weighed over 114,000 tons, and could carry 4,200 passengers and 1,100 crew members. It was one of the biggest ships ever made, giving the original Titanic a run for its money. Unfortunately, during its 7-day Mediterranean cruise with 3,206 passengers and 1,023 crew members on board, it met a very dangerous end. The ship started its cruise from Civitavecchia, Italy, and was scheduled to visit a bunch of ports before returning to the city. That evening, the ship was navigating its way through the nearby island of Giglio when Captain Francesco Schettino decided to perform a sail past. This is when ships pass close to the shore to impress passengers and locals. What Captain Schettino was doing is also sometimes called a salute. The only thing he was saluting was his career because the ship hit a rock so significant it had its own name. Yes, the Costa Concordia hit Lascaux and created a gash in the ship's hull 174 feet long. Water was flooding into the engine room, causing a loss in power. No one was aware of the severity of what was going on back on the bridge. No one reacted immediately, putting everyone's lives in a lot more danger. Even the evacuation procedure was poorly managed. Passengers weren't aware of the seriousness because the crew did a bad job of warning them. Lifeboats weren't released properly, and most of them were pretty faulty in the first place. Some crew members ended up abandoning the ship early, causing more confusion and fear. It wasn't until when the Italian Coast Guard responded to the distress call and dispatched rescue operations. 33 people lost their lives, of which 5 were crew members, 27 were passengers, and 1 was a salvage diver who died during the Alter Recover operation. The whole incident caused an international outrage and required a thorough investigation. Captain Schettino was charged with multiple manslaughter, causing a shipwreck, and abandoning his ship. He was found guilty in 2015 and was sentenced to 16 years in prison. Doing a salute for nearby pedestrians on the shore was a reckless move on the captain's part. Many people think that if Captain Edward Smith made it out alive on the Titanic, he would have been given a similar sentencing for not acknowledging the nearby danger and not being there on the bridge.
Schettino, for Italians at least, is an embarrassment. He embodies the worst traits of the Italian male to a stereotypical degree.
With this happening, in 2012, Clive Palmer had to halt his plans for the next Titanic. It isn't the wisest move to push the sequel of a sunken ship when another cruise boat just cost 33 lives in recent times. His political and business controversies were a completely different story. The mining empire that he built was accused of misappropriating funds that dampened investor confidence. He was also arguing with the Chinese shipyard, causing a lot of delays. Construction plans were promised but never moved forward. The marketing team of Titanic 2 was also facing a lot of trouble. Official updates were non-existent and the website was practically inactive. The silence made everyone think that Palmer decided to scrap the whole thing. That was until recent updates revealed the designs and construction plans for the ship. Designs and plans for Titanic. Clive wanted to balance historical accuracy and modern safety requirements. Titanic 2 aims to recreate the luxury of the original RMS Titanic, all while tweaking all the technological advancements that have taken place after a century. Like the original, Titanic 2 plans to stretch approximately 882 feet in length and 92 feet in width, with 9 decks to accommodate passengers. And yes, he also plans to put a grand staircase, dining saloons, and state-of-the-art rooms that made Titanic famous. It's as if he wants a modern story of Jack and Rose that doesn't end in tragedy. The new and improved Titanic also aims to have first, second, and third-class tickets. Think of it as business and economy classes on an airplane. To some, this would be a rather classist move, but from a business and marketing point of view, it simply offers more accessibility to people of all financial backgrounds. Learning from the Costa Concordia disaster of 2012, Titanic 2 will also be equipped with the latest navigation and radar equipment. And obviously, it will have proper lifeboat arrangements so that it complies with present-day safety regulations. There should be safety and evacuation equipment for each and every member on board. Since the RMS Titanic made do with what was available in the early 20th century, the newer model will have similar interiors but with a modern touch to it. There will be more electronic use like sensors, air conditioning, private bathrooms, and recreational facilities that revolve around technology. Titanic 2 won't be using coal-fired steam engines anymore, but rather opt for a diesel-electric propulsion system. Since transportation, energy resources, and the automobile industry as a whole have shown significant growth since 1912, this alternative propulsion system will be environmentally friendlier. Plus, it'll be meeting the modern maritime law. The original's towering black funnels would still be placed on top of the ship, but only the rear two would be functional, serving as the ship's engine. The other two are merely there for replication and aesthetic purposes. There's also a much stronger hull as compared to the original. With how Palmer advertises it, you might think that it would take 10 of those icebergs to inflict the same amount of damage it did back in 1912. The modern navigation system will be high-tech with the latest digital software and comms. Hopefully this time there'll be more consideration when it comes to avoiding nearby objects that could cause a lot of damage. One of the main things that made this design a lot better is the safety deck. This, unlike the original, would include lifeboats, hospitals, and other safety equipment. Palmer is very aware of what happened in 1912 and wouldn't dare to let it happen again. He wants people to experience the grand life that the people back then did on a massive cruise ship. Many of these exist already and have been sailing successfully for years now. All of these serve the same purpose: tourism and vacation. Just take a look at the icon of the seas. It looks like a whole city could fit in this thing because, believe it or not, it's 5 times the size of the Titanic. This is a fairly new project that launched on December 9th, 2022. It's over 1,100 feet long and can hold a maximum capacity of 7,600 passengers. Considered to be the largest cruise ship in the world, it was announced to be of service on 27th January 2024. The ship cost 1.86 billion euros to make. With that price in mind, it wouldn't take much to make something that's 5 times smaller, right? But still, even $500 million, which is the amount Clive Palmer is asking for, is a lot of money. He has the opportunity to examine the icon of the seas for a few months, maybe years. Up till now, it's been a very successful cruise ship full of tourists who want to be part of history. The problem is that Titanic 2 was a very early concept. It was announced right after the world was healing from the 2008 financial crisis. It's been over a decade since he's been ambitious about the project. It's almost gotten to the point where the public has completely lost interest. Royal Caribbean's chairman, Richard Fain, has already done the impossible with the icon of the seas. The idea for this iconic 363-ton aquadome started out on a napkin. A few years later, with the help of Meyer Turku, the drawing turned into a real-life accomplishment. Even if Titanic 2 was launched today, it wouldn't bring the same hype and attraction that Palmer once thought of. There's always the psychological fear of being on board a cruise ship famous for sinking in the 1900s. Palmer has all the time he needs to watch how the icon of the seas does. Unfortunately, it seems that it'll definitely be giving Titanic 2 a run for its money, no matter how historically accurate it is. He plans to launch it by 2027 and hopes to make it available for service by June of the same year. This is just 3 years away, and since it took the icon of the seas 2 years to jump from launch date to service date, this is a lot of time to plan everything.
Construction we hope to start in January, February 2025. It'll be a 2.5-year construction, and the first ship will come into service, scheduled at the moment, in June 2027, in its first voyage from Southampton to New York to complete the journey. At a time when the world is full of war and hate, we've got trouble in the Middle East, in Ukraine and in Taiwan, and people are focusing very negatively on what forces there are controlling our world. The Titanic reminds us of the critical aspects that all people aspire to, of love and friendship, and the love story of Rose and Jack in Titanic is one that touches the hearts of everybody.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel to see more content.